reporting over the weekend about the complaint lodged by the DA's former Environmental Affairs Minister, Dion George. He's complained to the public protector over how he was removed from the post. He says he was removed by the DA leader, John Steenhuisen, because Steenhuisen wanted to replace him with Willie Aucamp, who he says is close to the canned lion or the lion hunting industry. George was replaced as minister by President Cyril Ramaphosa on Steenhuisen's request. Aucamp was then appointed Environmental Affairs Minister again at Steenhuisen's request. Sanusha Naidu is an analyst at the Institute for Global Dialogue. Sanusha, good afternoon. I mean, this is the first time that I can remember when a DA member has made claims like this against the party's leader. This is, I don't think, ever happened before. How important is this complaint to the public protector?
Oh, good afternoon, Stephen. Good afternoon to the viewers. Yeah, you're right. I think it's really interesting because they've always been able to manage these internal disputes in-house. But then also bearing in mind, Stephen, that they haven't been in the public eye in terms of being part of a cabinet or part of a GNU and so forth. And I think these claims that are being made by the former environmental minister and taking the complaint to the public protector means that it can now be seen as how the DA as a political party can actually start using public institutions or Chapter 9 institutions in terms of trying to resolve what is internal disputes. For the longest time, the internal mechanisms of the DA have been about resolving these internal disputes, and it's been very muted, and they've remained insulated from the public eye. But now that you finally have cabinet ministers from the DA that are in the GNU, these public spates are becoming more and more part of the optics. And of course, bearing in mind that the DA is going into a federal executive leadership battle later in the year, or not so in the first half of 2026, that also raises questions about the internal dynamics of leadership within the party. And of course, some have
right.
This can accuse the ANC of. So it's almost like mirroring each other in a way.
I mean, it's an astonishing claim to make about the leader of your party. I mean, Dion George is essentially saying that he was removed for a sort of personal agenda, for a very sort of personal reason. I mean, this is astonishing. Normally, you would think someone who made a complaint like that against their leader of any party would eventually be kicked out. And Steenhuisen merely says, no, he's wrong, he's just very upset and this is revenge. I mean, his defense doesn't seem to go further than that.
Yeah, it's curious. I mean, I have to agree with you. It's curious in a sense because I think what astounds us, because this is now becoming a public spate in terms of bringing in the public protector. I mean, normally you would assume that internal mechanisms in a party will deal with these kinds of issues, particularly because it is about party leadership questions. But where I think it traverses a blurred line or a gray line is the question here about whether or not it has to do with the fact that it's a cabinet position, it's a ministerial position. And this is now becoming fought out battle lines that are happening in the party that is now basically seeped into the cabinet position. So how you see it, is it about the cabinet position that is really the objection to it and how it was done? Or is it a party leadership question, or is it party dynamics that is now filtering and spilling over into the cabinet decision? So the question for the public protector, I think, is to give merit to what processes were followed. Were those processes followed in the manner that is the mandate of what needed to be done? And whether or not this is now something that is being defined in terms of party leadership challenges and internal disputes that is brought out in terms of the cabinet position and how that will have to be looked at. I mean, there's an interesting way in which we have to see what the DA has also criticized, I think, the ANC of, and that is where does the state end and the party begin, and vice versa.
Well, I mean, there's irony upon irony here. I mean, for years, as you say, the DA's railed against the ANC's policy of cadre deployment. They've actually gone to court to demand the reasons for changes in cabinet. Under the law, you don't have to provide reasons. It's up to the president. Now, suddenly, they're going to have an investigation into what their leader did. And I imagine that their defence will be, no, their leader has the right to suggest to the president someone be removed. I mean, it just gets worse and worse.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? So the recommendation is that there's been this question around the issue around the wildlife, and there's also been allegations of sexual misconduct in the department leveled against Dion George. Now, the question there is, how do you deal with that? Because you have to then deal with many facets of this case. And the challenge, I think, would be for the public protector to look at this and say, well, what is happening here? How is this being defined? And where do we go in terms of whether there's been a contravention by the leader of the party to then recommend to the president that this person be removed and somebody else be replaced on the recommendation of the party leader? Bearing in mind that it's the prerogative of the president to appoint cabinet ministers. Again, that's another issue here. So taking the advice of the party leadership, and I think this is interesting in a sense because suddenly now the GNU throws up new avenues of issues that fall within a corridor of uncertainty, but now require certainty in terms of who makes the recommendation when you're in a coalition like this, and then how does that get translated into it, and how that impacts on internal party issues.
The DA, as you say, due to hold an election later this year, and we haven't seen any strong contenders against John Steenhuisen. Do you think it could be different this time? I mean, could this be the start of something that leads to a challenge against him?
Well, I think, there's been a constant kind of issue that has been kind of reverberating around the leadership battle in the DA rather, and that leadership battle has been about the John Steenhuisen faction versus a kind of faction that may be falling under people that are maybe not in the John Steenhuisen faction, etc. And these kinds of issues have been kind of filling the revolving door around who is in the John Steenhuisen faction, how is he consolidating this, and whether or not there is a contender to that. We keep hearing about the mayor of Cape Town and how he may be a contender, but again, these things are all new to understand because there's been a preservation of the leadership. They've always kind of kept it all in terms of cohesiveness and coherence. But suddenly now it's playing out in a very public way. And the issue here would be, who is in different camps and whether those contenders are going to come up against the leadership of John Steenhuisen. And to a large extent, is this the start of the consolidation that John Steenhuisen wants in the leadership issues? So again, it's fascinating that the ANC and the DA kind of mirror each other, but one keeps it very in-house. And suddenly now we have to think about what does this mean. But it also is in a year of local government elections. And so the question would be, how does this play out in terms of the kind of leadership architecture that comes out of the DA? And whether or not the DA is also opening up itself to other kinds of transformation debates around leadership, because it's still very much an inner circle that doesn't really reflect the transformation debate around leadership, etc. But then you also have to ask yourself, how does this play out with other ministers in the GNU that are part of the DA, that come from the DA, and are they also looking at this and thinking, how do we manage this process? So it'll play out very interestingly in terms of where this leadership battle goes. Is there a contender? But then the question is, does the DA leadership battle impact on what they do at the polls? Because there's also been this question of the DA has not made inroads into the African vote or the black vote, particularly in areas where they try to do that. And so the question would be, will this leadership battle have that implication as well?
Sanusha, Naidu, thank you. And analyst at the Institute for Global Dialogue, really do appreciate that.